Welcome, superhero ethics fans. A quick note before this episode. Once again this time, Jacob and I recorded live, and it was a fantastic conversation, but we had some sound issues. Jacob did a really heroic job cleaning up most of them, and we think this episode is definitely good enough to listen to, but we know that it's still not up to our normal standards, and we wanted to say that we apologize for that we recognize that this is not the kind of sound quality we want to get out to you, and that future episodes are going to be significantly improved over this one. So with that, on to the show. Welcome, everyone, to the 49th episode of Superhero Ethics. I'm Matthew, one of your hosts.
Hello, I'm Jacob. I'm also one of your hosts.
And today we're talking about something that I'm guessing a few others of you have been talking about, which is the new Avengers movie, Infinity War. And let me say very clearly from the beginning, we are going to be spoiling everything about this movie. And as we know, Thanos demands your silence. So in order not to incur Thanos' wrath, if you have not seen the movie, please pause this podcast, go out, go see the movie, then come back and keep listening because we're going to be talking about it quite a lot.
Yeah, I want to thank you a lot for saying that, because if you didn't, I was going to. Seriously, if you are all into the MCU, this is not one that you want to miss and just catch the highlight reel on. Watch this movie. Stop listening right now. It's the only time we're going to tell you not to listen to us. Stop listening right now. Go out. Watch Infinity War. Trust us. It's worth seeing.
Now, and for this, I think we're going to talk about a lot from the movie. But the main topic I think we're going to be talking about today is the topic of sacrifice and the topic of who can make a sacrifice, who gets to decide, who else gets to make a sacrifice, and what we learned about our heroes in this movie. And so let me just start, Jacob, by asking, before we dive into really the ethical questions, what did you think of this movie? What was your impression?
So, much like when we were talking about Star Wars movies specifically, this comes to mind where my favorite Star Wars movie is still, well, it's very close, but it's still The Empire Strikes Back. Because there's something about that visceral, that punch in the gut that you get when the bad guys win. When we end the movie and our heroes are at their lowest point, that I really enjoy it. And it's not because, like, I'm, a masochist or what have you, or a sadist if you're thinking I'm looking at these characters and not identifying with these characters. But it's that you have to be able to craft a story where that feels earned, where it actually does feel like a real loss when it happens. And so when it is executed well, as I feel it was in Infinity War, I eat it up. It's fantastic to me.
I would agree with that. And it's funny because, well, I think Empire is still my favorite. If it isn't, Last Jedi is, or Rogue One. And granted, Rogue One, there's a victory, but at a high cost. Last Jedi, there's even more of a loss than Empire. And I think in this movie especially, I liked it even more because, like Last Jedi, this movie surprised me. In so many ways, I didn't think I could be surprised by movies anymore. By Marvel movies specifically. Because I will say, from time and again, my biggest complaint about Marvel movies has been that death seems to have no meaning. And what I mean by that is that within the movie itself, for me, I love the movie Avengers, the first one, but they give you such a moment at the end of Tony Stark being willing to accept his own death and to deal with his own death, spoilers for the first Avengers movie, and then he doesn't die. And then at the end of Defenders, again, spoilers for Defenders, we get this beautiful moment of, it looks like Matt Murdock has died, but then of course he didn't. And to me, to see the movie end with actual characters dying, and now yes, I know you're all wanting to get at me already. Obviously, there's a great likelihood that many of these characters aren't dead, that something's going to happen in the second movie that will bring either some of them back or all of them back. The possibility that all the ones who went to Ash didn't actually die, they just were transported into the Soul Stone. There are so many possibilities there. But still, in this one movie, as an individual movie, it gave you the emotional power of people dying. If Peter Parker says to Tony Stark, "Please, Mr. Stark, I don't want to go," and then somehow something saves him, that moment doesn't have any power. But because it did, and because the movie was willing to let us go through that, And like you, I like maybe... It's funny, we talked about liking spicy food. We like getting punched in the face. I kind of want a movie to do the same thing. Not even as much because I like the sort of wallowing emo gothness of it, although there's a part of that for me. But it's because it makes everything that happened in them... It gives the movie stakes. It gives things consequences in a way that Marvel has done some of, but in this, it really blew me away.
Right, and anybody who's listened to a previous episode of Superhero Ethics, you've probably gotten the idea that Matthew and I really like it when there are consequences in our stories. When we talked about Kingdom Come, and we talked about the cataclysmic event toward the end of it, one of the things that really hit home was like there was a real loss and it stuck.
Yeah. And
how powerful that was and how much it made the story better. Because I feel The Last Jedi is much in the same way where we get real losses. Luke Skywalker goes away. Spoilers for Last Jedi. We're going to spoil literally everything we talk about on this one because there's a lot of connections that we can make between the various media we've discussed. Because as it turns out, Infinity War was, I'm going to say, a very well-crafted movie. They knew what they were doing going into this. They knew what they were setting up. And I feel that they executed on their mission very well. They gave us 50% of what they intended to deliver.
Yeah.
Which... I will say, so I'm saying I like it. I am going to level one criticism against it in that Infinity War itself felt really rushed. Mm-hmm. I would have actually preferred if we really took our time with it and went through the acquisition of the Infinity Stones over the course of a couple of movies.
Yeah. Just
because then we could establish the impact on the different forms rather than Thanos doing his rock star tour of the galaxy, getting all of the stones. Among other things, we didn't get enough time, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit more, but I feel we didn't get enough time to care more about Vision specifically. Yeah. And the Vision Scarlet Witch dichotomy, their relationship specifically. And I felt that particular loss, could have had a much higher impact had we had the time.
I would agree with that, especially because, and I'm hoping we'll get some of this in the second movie. As you all know, I love and adore Civil War. It's probably now my third favorite Marvel movie after Infinity War, after Black Panther first and Infinity War second. But it's still, I adore it. And I will say that there was so much from Infinity War that I wanted to see paid off in this movie. And like what you said, like Vision and Scarlet Witch end that movie on complete opposite sides, and they're connecting because I think they're both equally concerned about War Machine, about Rhodey. But there was a jump to see where they got together, and similarly, obviously we have not yet had Tony and Cap in the same room, and we had some lovely moments about the simple fact that Tony has been carrying around that cell phone with him clearly every day since then. It had a lot of power, but I would have liked. And I understand sort of making General Ross the ridiculous one, and therefore we just Secretary Ross, and therefore we just kind of blow past him. But I would have liked to see more of, we are doing all of this in the Sokovia Accords world, and what does that mean? The one thing I will say that I really liked about this, and I think this was kind of the director saying, you know what, the director of the other movie was stupid, I'm kind of saying everything that Joss Whedon did was in Ultron was kind of stupid, was the fact that we had almost nothing between Bruce and Natasha. Natasha kind of says, hey, and Bruce, sort of gives her an awkward nod that shows them that he has awkward feelings about her. But they didn't try to rekindle the romance. They didn't try to go back to that. Instead, it was just Bruce really wrestling with not being able to Hulk out again, which I do think is related to the fact that Natasha kind of forced him to be the Hulk, and he was stuck in the Hulk for years and years. And so I loved what they did there. I just wished some of the other parts of Civil War had a payoff.
Well, and I feel like when we're exploring the Hulk specifically, I also feel like the Hulk for the first time in its existence, in the Hulk's existence, his existence, actually was made to know fear during the confrontation with Thanos on the Asgardian ship. And I think actually this is not a topic we were intending to talk about, but I would love to explore that on a later podcast, because I feel that is when you've got somebody who's this unstoppable force who suddenly has experienced fear for the first time.
Yeah.
That is a story beat I really wish that they had explored, because I think that's where they're going with it. I think that's why Hulk refused to come out, and continue to refuse to come out for the entire movie. But, yeah, it's a fascinating idea, a little bit off topic from where we wanted to go.
Yeah.
I think that they didn't explore Bruce and Natasha because there wasn't time. Because there wasn't time for the story beats they wanted to give us, much less the story beats like those. But we had plenty of time to establish the singularity, how do I want to put it? So there was a humility vacuum in the movie when Tony Stark and Stephen Strange were in the same room at the same time talking to each other.
Yeah.
They established that hubris singularity.
And I will say, one of the things the movie also did really well was the teams it wound up coming up with. Because you're right, like, Doctor Strange and Tony are so, it's ego against ego, and balancing them with the most humble person in the whole Marvel Universe, Peter Parker, I thought was such a brilliant thing. I also think that Rocket and Thor, I want to see their road movie. Like, and I agree with you, it would have been nice to, and I don't think anyone really wanted 6 Infinity Stone movies, but I kind of do. I think you're right.
I would have been fine.
I would have been nice to see a whole movie that was Thor and I will say though, and this maybe can take us into our main topic, the other thing that really surprised me most was Thanos. That Marvel has been known for a long time to have, at least Marvel movies, a villain problem. Most Marvel villains are not actually that good. Marvel Netflix villains are fantastic. Even some of the Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. villains are great. Recently, they've been getting a lot better. And I will say Killmonger, I think, is probably my favorite, if not Loki. One of those two. No, actually, Killmonger a lot more than Loki. But Thanos is also up there, really, for me. And I literally said to my partner as we went into the movie, I'm really looking forward to this. I can't imagine that Thanos is going to at all be a villain I can relate to. We've had no backstory for him. He's just going to want to destroy the world. And as I said to you a couple of hours ago, no mustaches were twirled in the making of this movie.
Right.
They managed to make him a villain who had a believable plan that is, I can't quite say relatable, but I can understand how he utterly believes he is the good guy in his story.
And what makes Thanos so terrifying as a villain, you're absolutely right. He's very, he's a character you can actually, in some ways at least, identify with. But his principal motivation is compassion. And this is something that is usually reserved for our heroes, right? Newt Scamander is the one that immediately comes to mind as a hero who is principally motivated by compassion. What a beautiful character that is.
Right.
But when we put it into a character like Thanos, and we twist it into something that drives him into this massive universe-altering event where he's removing half of the life in the known universe.
Right.
Out of this sense of this is going to improve the quality of life for everybody involved, for everybody who sticks around, and therefore it is an action worth taking.
So I would push back a little bit on... I agree with most of that, but I push back a little bit on the use of the word compassion. Because to me, the word that really comes to mind when I think of what he's doing is utilitarianism. And compassion, to me, part of what that means is being aware of the suffering of individuals. And Thanos is purely playing a numbers game. And not only, yet I think he wants the absolute best for the most possible people. And maybe he believes that those half the world who blinks out of existence are going to not suffer. But Nebula, his own daughter, absolutely, he is literally torturing her to try to get Gamora. So many other people he is actively doing harm to. I think it is a version of compassion. It is something akin to compassion, but I don't really think the compassion and utilitarianism fit together.
I think you're wrong.
Okay.
Because from the perspective of Thanos, they do.
Yeah.
Right? I am speaking from his character's position when I say that he's motivated by compassion. Well, he truly believes that what he is doing is the right thing.
Right.
And we have seen, time and time again, stories where a hero does that when we talked about how much we hate this trope, right? Where a hero is like, come hell or high water, I'm going to do this because I know it's the right thing to do, and I'm not going to respect anybody else's wishes or anybody else's ideas about whether or not what I'm doing is a bad thing.
Right.
I'm just going to do my thing. Thanos is exactly that character. The difference is our heroes are aligned against him, and what he's doing is on the cosmic scale, right? He wants to affect the entire universe.
Right.
And he believes that because what his ultimate goal is the maximum reduction of suffering, that it is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think to some extent this is just a semantic argument, because I think it's more that for me, to me, compassion fits into a virtue ethics kind of idea, where it's really about, like, I am going to do the best thing I can of living out the ideals that I believe in, one of which is compassion. Whereas utilitarianism, I guess to me, compassion stands against utilitarianism, because so much of what he is saying is many people will suffer so that more people will not suffer. And yes, the global mathematical amount of suffering in the universe is by his thinking, I don't think his plan would work, but by his thinking, he is reducing the amount of suffering in the universe. But at least as I define compassion, actively causing suffering of many so that many more won't suffer, that doesn't feel like compassion. It feels like, or at least it feels like a very misguided version of compassion.
So what do you think? Do you think the act of a mercy killing is compassionate? Because this is what I relate it to.
Well, see, here's the thing, is that a mercy killing is I guess I can use this exact example, because I've done a lot of ethical work around sort of mercy killing and euthanasia and stuff like that. And I think when the idea is that an individual person is suffering and wants to be put out of their misery, then mercy killing is something that I generally am fully ethically okay with. But when you say, grandma's continuing to be alive is causing a huge burden on everyone else, and so, yes, she is suffering, but we're also taking into consideration all the suffering of someone else, and thus we are choosing for grandma that she should be killed. That, to me, takes on a very different perspective, and that's more because what the thing is, and granted, this is something there's an interesting connection, because it's something we talk about for the heroes all the time as well. He is making the decision for the whole universe about what is best for them.
Sure.
And to me, that's where I feel like...
Right, we obviously don't like that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had that happen on a more micro scale in a lot of these other media we've talked about. And we didn't like it there, and we certainly aren't going to like it when we're talking about the whole creation. Right. But yeah. No, so sorry, I pushed you a bit on that because I thought it was an interesting slight divergence in how we perceive Thanos' motivations, but also just on the idea of what it means to be compassionate in general. They also humanized Thanos in the story in many ways that I really appreciated, to show us that this was not somebody who was so twisted and evil that they were incapable of any of the feelings we normally associate with you or I.
Right.
And whether or not I do firmly believe that Thanos was in fact crying when he threw Gamora off the cliff to get the Soul Stone, because this was a price he was going to have to pay for it, and he still believed it was the right thing to do, but it tore him up inside because he actually really cared. So,
and I admit, that is a moment where I really wished we had more of Thanos' actual backstory. Because part of what I was wrestling with in that moment is, how are you both a loving father enough that having to kill Gamora physically pains you and causes you grief, and you're also the father of Nebula and happily torturing her? And I think, one of the things that Nebula and Gamora in their own discussions in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and I thought this was probably the best plotline of that movie, they established the idea that from their perspective, Gamora had been his favorite, and that, Nebula had been tortured by him, and that Gamora's role in that torture obviously is a big part of her motivation in this movie. But I wished we had seen flashbacks where we could actually see that from Thanos, because I was having trouble believing that Thanos loved her that much when so much of what we had seen of him as a parent had been so very different. Especially because, Gamora seemed actually much more anti-Thanos than Nebula was. Mm-hmm. And we can sort of headcanon that to understand it better in terms of, that because Nebula didn't get his love as much, that she's more hungry for it. And so and there's all sorts of psychological things we could put on there. But I wish we'd gotten that more, because I agree with you that I felt for Thanos in that moment, but I would have felt for him a lot more if we'd seen more of that.
Well, I felt for Thanos insofar as I was like, oh, okay, I feel bad because Gamora doesn't realize that he doesn't have those feelings. I don't feel bad that he made the decision that he did, other than that was wrong and he shouldn't have done that. Right. That should have been where he stopped and went, that's not a price I'm willing to pay. But, honestly, clearly he is. That's the whole character, right? His goal wouldn't be realized if he weren't willing to just arbitrarily decide who gets to live and who doesn't.
And this, I think, gets us into the meat of what we wanted to talk about today, which is this idea of sacrifice. And I want us to go through and talk about, every time he gets one of the, he is willing to make a sacrifice, and that's how he gets the Soul Stone. And in theory, his whole point is half of us have to sacrifice so the other half are okay. But as I read it, every time he gets a Soul Stone, except for the one that we see where he...
An Infinity Stone.
Yeah, Infinity Stone, sorry. Every time he gets one, except for the one that he gets off-screen by destroying Xandar, he gets it in large part because one of the heroes is not willing to make a sacrifice. And we'll talk... Each one is a little bit different. And I walked out... At first, my thought was just, Gamora and Cap, you were so stupid. How could you have not made those sacrifices? And the more I think about it, the more and I've heard other people talk about this, I think that was kind of one of the major themes of the movie, is that Thanos gets what he wants because he's willing to make the sacrifice that everyone else doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit terrifying, because at any point along the way, all it would take was one character being willing to do that. Yeah. In fact, Stephen Strange has two different moments where he can choose to sacrifice. Once to sacrifice the Time Stone itself, and another to sacrifice Tony Stark. And he's unwilling to do either. Now, there's probably reasons why he's unwilling to sacrifice Tony Stark, given the nonsense prognostication that he did, but...
Well, and so let's now use this as a time to dive into each one of these, because I think each one poses some really interesting ethical questions. And so, the first one he gets is the Tesseract, is the Space Stone?
That one's the Space Stone.
Space Stone, yeah. And here what we have is Loki, who, till now, selfless and sacrificing for love of his brother is not really the word you put on him. But here he is willing to say, please spare my brother's life, and I will give you the Soul Stone. I'll give you the Space Stone. Mm-hmm. What was your take on that?
So, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but especially at that point in the early game, because Loki at first says, go ahead, it's no skin off my back. Basically trying to call Thanos on his bluff. Thanos clearly proves he's not bluffing. And Loki has a rare moment of, oh crap, I do care about my brother, this sucks. Yeah. Which, is really touching. But I do feel that for Loki, his sacrifice is actually giving up the Tesseract, and isn't giving up his brother. And that's mostly because Loki's always been an entity with a plan. An Asgardian with a plan, right? Or rather, a Frostbite with a plan. Where when Loki's doing something, he's usually got a couple of moves ahead planned out. And he usually doesn't give something up unless he's got some plan to reclaim or somehow get one up. Right? And especially given the situation that they're in, which seems dire but also rather instantaneous, you can almost see the wheels turning in Loki's eyes, I feel, where he's like, okay, he's only the second stone, we can get out of this, and if I have Thor, that's another card in my hand that I can use to get this back. So if I give this up now, I'll have a better game later. Whereas if Thor goes away, Thanos might still get the stone out of me, and then we're down both of us.
Yeah, and that, I think it's an interesting take, and I had not thought of that before. I was thinking of this purely as a post-Ragnarok, his father has died, his sister has now died, his adopted world has died, and he has had some degree of character evolution that he's now maybe more willing to see Thor in that light. Before you had explained it the way you had, I was still thinking that his is one more of the stupid decisions. As we're going to get to later, I don't think of it as quite as bad as Gamora's, or even Cap's to some extent, because in that moment, Thanos is in the room with the stone. Mm-hmm. And I can understand Loki having a perspective of, if I don't give it to him, he just kills me and takes it anyway. And granted, we don't know the physics of it. Is he using illusion magic and that kind of thing? And maybe that's sort of a headcanon you can put in. But I still... And your perspective, I think, also helped. And I do think that maybe from that kind of self-calculating way, what he is doing is makes some sense. But the theme that I'm going to keep coming back to is, when you have the chance to not give the tyrant who wants to destroy half the universe a tool towards doing it, you don't do it.
No, you're not supposed to. And one thing I do want to caveat this with is that that's what's going on in my head when I'm watching that scene. I think that's what's going on in Loki's head when we're watching that scene. I think the reason why he doesn't choose to give up Thor has nothing to do with any kind of plan he's making. Yeah. I think it's the same kind of not willing to make that sacrifice decision, because that's the theme throughout the movie, with actually with one clear exception, when it comes to what happens with the reality stone, right. Where the choice is actually taken from our heroes. But in this particular case, I do think that however Loki's justifying his decision to himself, it's because he's unwilling to give up Thor.
Right. I think that makes sense. And so now let's go to the next one, which I'm not sure I'm getting the order right, but I think this one is going to frame almost all of the discussion.
Reality is next.
Okay.
Reality was the one with the collector.
Yes. Okay.
Correct.
Right. And so that one was just... they didn't have any chance to stop, but that one...
Well, so Gamora and Star-Lord had their discussion. For whatever reason, I'm blanking on Star-Lord's real character name.
Peter Quill.
Peter Quill, thank you. So Quill and Gamora have their conversation, have their little heart-to-heart. And the moment comes where Gamora's like, okay, we talked about this, Quill, kill me. And he clearly very much doesn't want to do it, but he does pull the trigger, right? Quill proves that in that moment, he is one of the heroes, one of our few heroes apparently, who's actually willing to make this sacrifice.
Which is interesting given the huge fuck-up he does later. But in that moment, he's willing to... And also, Gamora, I think we're getting detailed a little confused, because my memory, the reality stone is what they get on Xandar. She wants to be killed because she has the knowledge about the Soul Stone.
Right. They can't stop him from getting the reality stone. Right. Okay, that's unfortunate. Right.
Okay, so Quill is willing to make that sacrifice. Right. And I want to get to Gamora, but even though we're going out of order, let's talk for a minute about Cap and Vision.
Yes.
Because in some ways, Cap sort of frames the whole thing with the "we don't trade lives" line. And what he is doing there is he's saying that he is kind of using his authority as the leader of the team to stop Vision from Vision's desire to willingly sacrifice himself.
Right.
What's your take on Cap's perspective there? The we don't trade lives.
I think Cap's... First of all, he's just a goddamn liar.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand what he's doing. I do not understand for a second how Steve Rogers can say that in good conscience after what has happened.
Right.
And what comes later.
When he jumps on a grenade to try and stop it from killing others, he's trading his life.
Right.
When he
crashes the plane.
Right. In both of those cases, I thought Cap is absolutely dead wrong. Right. I mean, this was even more wrong than Civil War for me. And I hope that that's where the movie is. I'm going to be very disappointed if the second movie is the vindication of this philosophy, because to me, A, it's deeply hypocritical, because we said, that's what he does. And B, he's now stopping someone else from willingly trading their life.
Right. And it's what is most upsetting about that is it's clearly the right play, right? This is I am willing to go. I am willing because my life, Vision is saying my existence is not worth the, trillions of entities that are going to perish as a result of Thanos achieving his objective. So if we can get rid of the Mind Stone, we're good, and my life is worth that. Right? And if Cap were in that position, he would make the same damn sacrifice, and he wouldn't let anybody tell him no. And so I got really upset by Cap denying Vision that choice.
Yeah.
Although really it's not Cap who denies the choice, it's Scarlet Witch, because Cap can't actually rip the gem out of his head.
Right. And I agree that it is an impossibly hard thing to ask Scarlet Witch to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and that's, to continue the metaphor you were drawing before, this is now the, well, it's a mercy killing, and I'm asking you to do the thing. But that's, to me, there's a direct parallel of Peter and Quill and Gamora and Wanda and Vision. And here again, maybe if we'd had more of a movie to develop this idea of a Wanda-Vision romance, I would still think she's wrong, but I'd have at least more emotional resonance with her. Neither of these two are my favorite characters, and their romance never really was one that I care. I don't ship them. Let's put it that way. And so I think on an emotional level, I don't have a oh my god, no, Wanda having a kid, in that same kind of a way. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to you have to put your personal feelings aside and help Vision do what he wants to do. Now, to me, where it would have been a real question is if all of them say, Vision, we're sorry, we have to destroy that Mind Stone, and Vision saying no. Then it becomes a real, Right.
Then it's the Tuvix problem from the one episode of Star Trek Voyager, where you have Tuvok and Neelix combined as one character, and he doesn't want his unique existence to go away, but Janeway wants her 2 crew members back.
Right.
That episode is such a problem.
There's a lot of things in that episode. But even just sticking with it here, if that was the question, then they're basically in the same position that Thanos is, because they're deciding for someone else.
Right.
But here, where Vision wants to make the sacrifice, for the rest of them, and especially for Cap, for Wanda to say no, I get where Wanda doesn't want to do it, but for Cap to support that and to do the whole we don't trade lives thing, it just, like you said, it's so hypocritical because he clearly trades his own life. And it doesn't work.
And it's also demonstrably false, because what did they do when they set up the procedure to try to safely extract the Mind Stone from Vision? They throw hundreds upon hundreds of Wakandans, of the Wakanda military, out in front of the enemy, and they're not staying alive, right? So their lives are apparently disposable, so that Vision can live, so this one entity can live. I have a real problem with that.
Yeah.
Why is Vision more important than all of those Wakandans?
And while I don't think this is the point the movie was making, we can't have that discussion without thinking about, what, the Wakandans being black and Vision Vision being purple, but that the fact that it is the Wakandans' lives that are being willing to sacrifice is a point that I think has to be remembered.
Right, that is the military that we are using in that moment.
Right, and it's a black military, and that I think is deeply significant as well. So yeah, I think we're in pretty much agreement there, and there isn't too much to go into, except to go ahead.
So interestingly, this is yet another instance, the Mind Stone being the last stone that Thanos acquires. This is another instance where our heroes ultimately, or in this case Scarlet Witch, ultimately does honor Vision's wish, but she has that choice taken away from her. Right. She actually succeeds and destroys the Mind Stone and annihilates Vision in the process. And Thanos just, lives out, who does that song?
Cher.
Cher, yeah, lives out a Cher song. Thank you. For whatever reason, that even though we alluded to it in Kingdom Come as well, but yeah, he does that thing and just deletes the whole choice.
Well, and maybe here's a parallel to what we were talking about before with Star-Lord. Both Star-Lord and Wanda are willing eventually to make that sacrifice, but they do it too late. Right. One of the things that I wondered if sort of was the point was, by Quill waiting so long, Thanos had been able to stop it, he didn't know it was coming. And you can get into the headcanon of that either way, it's not clear. But certainly it's clear Wanda waited too long. If she was willing to do it before, Thanos wouldn't have had the time stone, he wouldn't have been there, he couldn't have stopped.
And Quill also waited too long because he had the gun pointed at Thanos' head. If he had just dropped it down and shot immediately, before Thanos could twig to what Gamora was talking about,
right,
then he wouldn't have had the opportunity to use the Reality Stone to turn the gun into a bubble dispenser. Yeah. I don't know what Thanos' predilection with bubble guns is, but that he does that trick multiple times. So I think somewhere in his past he really liked bubbles.
Short aside, I will say I didn't love that detail because it seemed a little bit too. To me, the moment you hear the click of the gun and you realize that Peter was willing to shoot her should be a moment with incredible emotional significance.
Yep. It's robbed by...
The bubbles being a silly joke took that away a little bit. So, but let's stay on Quill, because I think you made a great point. I want to let you make it. When they almost have a plan to stop Thanos and the plan doesn't work, you were saying that in a way, it's another place where Quill isn't willing to make his sacrifice. And what
right. So in this particular case, they're trying to stop Thanos from getting the time gem. But they've met him on Titan, and they're having their fight out with him. And to their credit, Tony and Spider-Man and Stephen Strange and Drax the Destroyer, they've got...
And Mantis.
And Mantis. Right, because Mantis is keeping his brain locked. So they have actually got Thanos on lockdown and they're trying to remove the gauntlet. So their plan is working. And when Quill finds out about what Thanos did in order to acquire the Soul Stone, that he killed Gamora, now suddenly the universe doesn't matter anymore. And I mean, this is very consistent with Quill's character. This is why he took too long to pull the trigger on Gamora himself. But he sort of loses his head. He doesn't think rationally. And in this particular moment, he lets his own concerns go above. And this is the exact same thing that Captain America was doing, same thing that Scarlet Witch in many ways is doing, is that they're doing the thing that we're told our heroes shouldn't do, which is putting what they want ahead of what's best for the anti-Spock thing. When Spock sacrifices himself at the end of Wrath of Khan, right, he is making the right choice.
I just have to name, and I'm probably going to actually include this in the show notes, there is the most beautiful meme I've seen about this entire movie the top is a shot of Cap saying, "We don't trade lives." And the bottom is a shot of Spock in the radiation chamber having given himself up to save the Enterprise, and the words are, "Fuck you say?"
Right.
Which I thought was so brilliant. But getting back to Peter, I think you're right. There, it's that he's not... I mean, he's the epitome of the cocky white boy. Who just is... He sees that he is angry, and he's going to give into his emotions.
Right.
And I think you're right that there's a parallel. But to me, the level of... I'm going to talk more about Gamora and why I think she should have let her sister die. I think Loki should have let his brother die. I think all these people should have made those sacrifices. But there you were talking about sacrificing an actual person they love. Mm-hmm. Quill just has to swallow his pride. Quill just has to be able to put aside his emotion in the moment and say, you know what, he has to sacrifice his feelings.
Right.
And acknowledge that his desire for vengeance in that moment is less important. And to me, that is so much less of a sacrifice that I have to walk away saying, I can emotionally relate to why those other people made the wrong decision. Quill is just a fucking idiot.
Well, especially since all he had to do was be patient, right? All he had to do was wait for them to get the gauntlet off, and he could go to town on Thanos. He doesn't have that, supremely powerful artifact anymore. All he had to do was wait for, 2 minutes, maybe.
Now, and I will say, as a bit of writing, I thought it was brilliant, because... I mean, Star-Lord is presented to us in the first movie, and someone in the second movie, as the ultimate man-child. Mm-hmm. And I both found it really enjoyable, but also in my head, I'm watching it, and I'm thinking about all the ways in which our culture is starting to say, you know what, maybe making heroes out of man-children, and guys who are just cocky and fun, and live by their emotions, and who cares, because devil may care, and who cares about the consequences? Actually, maybe that's kind of problematic. And I do think that the writers did something brilliant here in saying, yes, you're right. He was the hero of those 2 fun movies, but when actual real push comes to shove, consequences face him, his man-childness is the problem.
Right. And he gives into it, and because of that, and some other things. So he's not the only reason the Time Stone gets captured, right? But he is a reason the Time Stone gets captured. There's sort of a cascading series of failures there.
Right.
Now, you can argue whether Stephen Strange giving up the Time Stone to Thanos in exchange for Tony Stark's life is actually playing is actually making the right sacrifice or not. Because at this point in time, Stephen Strange has apparently viewed some absurd number in the tens of thousands of probabilities from a point in time forward, and has seen one where they succeed. And probably in that moment, probably the line we're going to get sold is that this future requires Tony Stark to continue past this point. Right. And so he knows if Tony Stark is gone, that the one possibility where they actually come out of this goes away.
Yeah, I when I think of the people who I'm like, how could you have done that? Doctor Strange is not in that conversation for that reason. Because I fully believe, I think he would have happily let Tony Stark die. He says that early on, that he would let Peter Parker die. I think he has come to believe that it's because Tony Stark has to live. And my own headcanon is, I think it's because Tony Stark and Cap together have to sacrifice themselves at the end of the next movie. That's a whole other conversation we can have. But I definitely think...
after a very large hug and maybe a kiss.
Yes. That would be fantastic, too. And fan fiction world would explode if that happened. Also a topic we're going to do sometime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I take the word soon out of that discussion. But to me, where I can lay some blame to Strange is when Thanos is the Ember Maw, who I thought was a fantastic first half villain. Such a good character, shows up in the donut ship and is fighting them, and Strange refuses to just go and hide, the way Tony Stark wants him to.
Yep.
And it's, again, superhero ego and
hubris.
Hubris seems the word that comes to mind for all of this.
For most. So clearly, clearly Scarlet Witch's actions are not motivated by hubris.
Right.
They're motivated by whether you buy into their relationship or not. Those characters are clearly established to be deeply in love with each other, and so not being immediately willing to sacrifice the person that you love for the greater good is not something I feel I can fairly judge someone for. Right? But you're absolutely right that Stephen Strange could have just fucked off, right? And it would have been better than what he ultimately decided to do. But he's like, no, I'm the Sorcerer Supreme. I can handle this.
Yeah.
Right? Or well, we didn't see how long it took the Asgardian refugee ship to get sacked, but I'm assuming that it just got sacked because they weren't able to put up anything resembling a fight. Is there actually another? So I'm trying to think through the. Gamora watching Nebula. This is again. So she loves her sister, right?
Yeah.
So Gamora being unwilling to sit there while Nebula suffers, and ultimately giving up the location of the Soul Stone, a decision that she herself pays for with the ultimate price. Yeah, I'm going to sit here and say that it was the wrong call and that you should have just let Nebula die, because clearly, but I can't really fault her for it.
Well, and so here, and I want us to return at some point to that question of hubris, because I think it's really important.
Yes.
Let's go on this one again. Because, yeah, it is the... To me, Nebula was the one... Gamora was the one who I most thought was in the wrong. Not because I don't utterly emotionally relate to her situation. But in every other one of those cases, Thanos is now in the room with the Soul Stone, with the Infinity Stone. Or, in the case of the Mind Stone, he knows where it is and he's going to be in the room soon. You know, like I said, with Loki, like, it was already right there. And in every one of those cases, there is an argument to be made of, look, he's going to get it anyway, whether maybe I'll make the sacrifice. I disagree with that. But to me, what Gamora did is so fundamentally different, because Gamora isn't Gamora gets him to the stone. Whereas, let me try, I know we want to talk, let me just finish this. My belief is, if he kills Nebula and he kills Gamora, he now has absolutely no way to ever get the Soul Stone. And maybe he finds it in a millennia, but like, the implication is that is the one that is actually quite hidden from him.
Right. So, and that's true, right? So this is something that, if Gamora never gives up the information, it, potentially delays his plans by a considerable measure. However, one thing I want to, I'm not really throwing it back in your face, but I'm going to throw back at you that this would be a situation if she chooses that Nebula needs to die to protect the secret, then it's her making a decision for somebody else, much in the same way that we were criticizing Thanos for making a decision for half the universe. Now, that one is, I will caveat that with that, yes, Nebula says don't tell him, right? Nebula's like, doesn't matter what happens to me, don't you dare. But Gamora not being capable of making that decision, because we criticized Cap for trying to make the decision for Vision, right?
Right.
Gamora being unwilling to make that decision for Nebula, I feel is something that is consistent with what we would expect a hero to do. Because Gamora was willing to sacrifice herself to protect the location of the Soul Stone. She told Peter Quill to kill her.
Right.
It's Peter Quill's failing that he didn't do it in time.
I think there is a good point there, but I also think, and here my ethics professor, I was already kind of pulling up things from my ethics class of utilitarian and virtue ethics, and I think that there's another aspect of formal ethics here that really matters, which is a difference between active versus passive decisions. You know, to me, if the decision was, you either have to drive this knife into Nebula's heart, or I will get the Soul Stone. Yes, there she is making the decision for Nebula. But she is taking an action to kill the person.
Sure.
But here, if she takes no action, there's no action she has to take. Nebula will be tortured and probably die, but he doesn't get the Soul Stone. She has to take an affirmative action to stop the torture of her sister. And I know that seems like kind of a nitpicky distinction, but to me it is a very relevant distinction of, like if she had said, if she had taken an action to cause Nebula's death, I'm more by what you're talking about. The fact that it's Nebula's getting tortured and she just has the chance to stop it and decides not to stop it. You're right, it is still problematic. But I think it's enough of a distinction that I can still say, because I think in the end, this is the first thing you said to me. We talked about this was the word necessary evil.
Yeah.
That I do think on some level it's not just about individuals making sacrifices, but sometimes it is maybe not actively forcing someone else to be sacrificed, but not acting to stop it.
Right. So a captain ordering one of their crew to that individual's death because it will save the rest of the crew is a decision made that is a necessary evil, but it is not. It still is ethically problematic to me, because I am still, in that position, that person is still deciding the fate of another and saying, this is how we're going to get to the greater good.
I mean, and now, granted, we're jumping to a very different media, and I don't want to get too lost in the traction of it, but it's what Sheridan does in Babylon 5, where he orders...
With the crew of the One White Star.
Right, we're basically, to give a very brief explanation there, he orders one ship to let itself be captured and killed by the Shadows in order to allow their plan to be tricked. And again, I find the main character of that Sheridan very ethically challenged in a lot of ways. But I think, and this is a good way to maybe get into this hubris point, I think I have, yes, the idea of you never order someone else to sacrifice themselves is a very good ethical line to hold. And in the ideal world, I think that's one we absolutely have to hold, and I'm incredibly questioning any time, because I'm always going to ask, who are you choosing to sacrifice, and why aren't you choosing to sacrifice yourself, and all those kind of things.
Right, why didn't Gamora just commit suicide? Maybe she didn't have the tools available to her.
Yeah, but that also could have worked well.
Yeah.
And that's again where you get into these questions of can
you really require somebody to do that? That doesn't seem particularly fair either.
And Vision, you require someone to make the above and beyond choice. Right. But I do think, for a lot of these heroes, and especially for Cap, and I know a lot of people probably are starting to think I have something really against Cap, again, in more recent movies, I've been more and more on his, more recent discussions, I've become more and more on his side, although still more on Team Tony than I am on Team Cap, but more understanding of Cap. But in this movie, I just think he is so wrong. And it's because when I hear that line of "we don't trade lives," what I'm thinking of is it's the Kobayashi Maru.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, and it's the thing we talked about in the last episode, that Cap is under the belief that he is powerful enough, that he is strong enough, that he is good enough, and that his friends are, that when faced with this terrible choice of make Vision die or make half the beings in the galaxy die, in the universe die, that he can say, I am good enough to find a third way, that I won't have to face the Kobayashi Maru. And for me, there is such incredible hubris in that moment. And I think same with Strange, that he thinks he is going to be able to, when early in the movie, not later in the movie.
Right. Although possibly even later in the movie, if he actually thinks he's seeing that one timeline to fruition through his actions.
Sure.
Right.
But yeah, to me, that's where it's the hubris of those characters that I think is just so horrible.
And if you take the pet theory for Loki, and what Loki was doing in that moment, that's also hubris. And of course, Loki is not a character that we would ever say was not a prideful person. Mm-hmm. Loki's all about believing in Loki. So, but that tracks. That is also kind of a consistent theme in the movie, that people who are making decisions that ultimately get us to the path where Thanos gets the Infinity Gauntlet are people who incorrectly think that they can find a way that doesn't make them have to sacrifice anything.
Right.
And some of it might just be not fully understanding the stakes, right? Not fully understanding what they're up against. So some of it I feel can be forgiven because our heroes have faced similar circumstances, right? Where they have been able to find that third option. Right. And so they've sort of been conditioned in a way to, we're going to, I've done this before, we're going to do the right thing, we're going to find the way to save everybody, and it's all going to be okay. Of course, Phil Coulson died in Avengers, but, I mean...
Yeah.
That was definitely a price that stuck and didn't ever get retconned at any point or changed or corrected because there is no revolving door around death in the Marvel Universe.
Tahiti, it's a magical place.
Tahiti is a very magical place.
And I will say, I'm glad that, and I don't think you've seen it yet, so I'm not going to spoil anything, but this same issue of the need to make a sacrifice is also referenced in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Mm-hmm. I thought a great way of tying that in. Mm-hmm. I want to shift us to discussing what we would like to see in the next movie as kind of a way of closing. But is there more on these kind of questions from Infinity War? We've talked about the hubris. I'm sorry. There is actually one more big one that I want to bring up. And granted, we've talked about this issue in a lot of other ways, but I think this movie highlights it again. Everything we are seeing here is about, we understand why the individual can't make the decision they need to make because of their emotional involvement in the issue. And where I keep coming back to on this is, yes, for an individual citizen, we understand, if the individual citizen runs into a burning building, they're probably going to save the person they care about over someone they don't know. But on some level, I expect that the decisions being made, certainly by my leaders, that they are not going to be made just out of personal desire, but out of the greater good. Mm-hmm. With a degree of compassion and not getting into utilitarianism aspect, but that personal biases can be set aside. And certainly I would hope that from our police and our military and our firefighters and things like that, that to some extent personal bias can be set aside, or at least when an individual has a personal bias, they can recognize that and say, I can't make the decision here. Someone else who's more impartial has to do the triage work.
Right, where they recuse themselves in those situations.
Right. And what it comes back to me is to me what I think of as the biggest problem I have with superheroes is that because there is no sort of established order, no bureaucracy, no overarching, decision making, all of them are always going to be in that place of, I have sort of been appointed or have appointed myself to save everybody, but I also have my personal biases. And so I go save Lois instead of stopping the thing at Doomsday. I save my brother or I save my sister instead of saving humanity.
Right. Say in the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, I save Mary Jane rather than the car full of civilians, although he saves both because superheroes cheat all the time.
Right.
Again, they've been conditioned through our very stories. They have been conditioned to believe there is in fact a way to save everybody.
Right. I need to go to take it. I know I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but here's my hot take. I think the leaders of S.H.I.E.L.D. are right to nuke New York at the end of Avengers. You know, and again, Tony Stark and Cap, they are able to cheat. They're able to do both. But when faced with those choices, I think their dispassionate decision makes some sense. And I guess I'm coming around a little bit from where you're coming from in that I think all of them make the wrong decision. And I hope the next movie is going to be about them changing it. I think you convinced me to blame them a little bit less because, of course, their emotional involvement to it. But it again makes me think, that's why I want Sokovia of some kind. Because what I want is, and not General Ross, he's terrible, but I want some other body making the decision that doesn't have the emotional connection. Because what it again comes down to is, if these heroes are enforcers of justice, which that means they are to some extent a police force, a law enforcement force, a military, their emotional involvement shouldn't be what makes their decisions.
Right. And they don't have somebody, so the Avengers, for example, do not have somebody like Superman, the way that the Justice League does, where, well, of course, and Superman, as we discussed in the previous episode, has a hard time making hard decisions, which is why that usually doesn't fall to him. But in the case of the Avengers, each and every one of them individually has been placed in situations where they potentially had to make a hard choice and then got to cheat their way out of it. I do agree with you, actually, that the best solution to this particular problem is probably to have a centralized agency whose job it is to be the people who make that call, to be the people who create the arbitrary decision, the neutral, unbiased, free from outside information, or not outside information, but free from personal bias information decisions, rather than our individual heroes. Because even though I do believe Steve Rogers, he's got a good head on his shoulders, he's got a good heart, he really believes that he can save everybody, Steve Rogers is not always going to make the right decision because he is grounded in that belief that he can save everybody.
And I think it is fair that we note that we are talking about a perfectly impartial, perfectly fair, perfectly bureaucratic organization that would be impossible to create because of human frailties and failings. And someone pointed something out to me recently that I don't think I've talked about, but that actually, again, took me one more step to really being able to better identify with why Cap does the thing he does, even though I disagree with him, which is that since he personally, in Winter Soldier, I mean, he more directly than anyone has seen, like, he did believe in an agency. He did believe in S.H.I.E.L.D. And S.H.I.E.L.D., it turned out, was completely taken over by Hydra. And so he, more than anyone, has a reason to be like, fuck this, I'm not trusting another agency, I'm trusting myself. And again, I when someone pointed that out, I could really emotionally relate and support him in that. But I do still think an imperfect agency, an imperfect bureaucracy making a decision is going to be better than the imperfect people.
Assuming no corruption from institutions.
Right. You also don't let it get taken over by Hydra.
Right. Right. Because obviously we're all perfect, but it's better to have a collection of people that can debate these things, right, and that can come to something resembling consensus or some kind of majority vote and have some kind of established rules governing that, than to have an individual like Captain America saying, nope, we're not making that decision, we're going to do this other thing instead. Right. Without any kind of oversight, without any kind of well, I was about to say without any kind of consequence. There's absolutely consequences. They lost. Right? But if somebody, I almost feel as though if Tony Stark were actually on the planet at that time, he might have talked with Cap and said, this might actually be the right call. Yeah. Because Tony Stark does understand sacrifice in that way. Was willing to throw himself out at the end of Avengers. Yeah. That being said, yes and he's also the biggest pile of hubris we have in this universe. So.
Yes and no, because What if it's Peter Parker who has to do sacrifice?
Oh yeah, then
There's no way
Tony is
doing
suddenly off of it, right? But that's a situation where he would have to recuse himself because he has a strong personal bias.
I think that's right. And there's another point I want to make, which actually it was first pointed out to me by a friend and colleague of ours, Margaret, who works at the store that I work at, one of my bosses. Where she was saying that, because as we're talking about this, part of what I'm thinking of is I wish Black Panther had been in that discussion of do we sacrifice or not, because obviously he was one of the chief supporters of Tony and the Sokovia Accords and all that. And on the one hand, Wakanda deciding that they're going to stand up and fight for the rest of the world and the rest of the universe, and not just for Wakanda, is this beautiful moment of somewhat the repudiation of what Wakanda had been doing wrong, and is somewhat maybe, to me, and there's a whole other discussion we could have there, and I'm glad that as two white guys we're not really having a discussion, but the what did Killmonger have a point? And to me, Killmonger is very much in the Magneto position of I disagree with his methods, but I absolutely agree with his perspective and his goal. And I think it's great that Wakanda is now sort of adopting his perspective.
Yeah.
In a different way, because he wants to help oppressed people fight, and it's not the same thing, agreed. But they are adopting the idea of we're going to do more to help the outside world, not just Wakanda. But the point Margaret made that has really stuck with me is I wish it had been for more than Vision. Because if it was, where I thought they were honestly going was that the last stone was it was buried under Wakanda, and that was part of why the heart-shaped flower and vibranium, that there's something in that or some other reason. But there was going to be some reason, or that just Wakanda said, we will make our fight here because we will contribute this. Right. But doing it all to save Vision, as you said, it's why would they choose to sacrifice all of those hundreds, if not thousands of Wakandan lives to save a robot, to save a android
to save one person?
Yes,
right. You can call him a robot. That's fine. It's still a person, right? But yes, that's the exact opposite of the admittedly utilitarian argument of you're putting the needs of the one over the needs of the many, and that's completely turning on its head from what Vision wanted, and from what most heroes I feel should be wanting. They should have had real problems with those. Even if every single Wakandan was there, yes, we are willing to lay down our lives for this one person. Somebody should have been sitting there saying, but he wants to make the sacrifice himself. Isn't that better than everybody here making that sacrifice? Yeah. And that is the part of the movie I have the biggest problem with. And it's not because I don't think it wasn't a good movie or a good story beat. Because it definitely was. But it did create the situation where we were holding one entity's existence as more valuable than many, many other entities. I can't hold truck with that. I can't.
Well, and I think it gets to a flaw in many people's ethical reasoning, which is that you don't want to make the sacrifice that you can see and you have to think about, because you are making the sacrifices that you're not thinking about. This is the whole point of the Black Lives Matter movement, is how much are we agreeing to sacrifice all those lives to keep the level of stability and privilege that we have? If someone were to say to T'Challa, are you willing to sacrifice hundreds of lives of your people in order to protect Vision? I think he never says yes. Right. But he doesn't think about it in those terms.
Right, he's thinking we're protecting the universe, right, by protecting the Mind Stone.
Right. Where again, you could just destroy the damn Mind Stone. Let's use this because we're about an hour and I want to start wrapping up. Let's use this to talk about what we want to see in the next movie, because I do think the problems that I have with our character, I am going into this movie thinking that the writers agree with me that our characters were wrong. And I'm really hoping the second movie sees that. So that's what I'm kind of hoping to see those things paid off in the second movie. What about you? What do you want to see in the movie to help write these questions?
So I have some thoughts. First, what I would really like to have happen, I know for a fact is not going to happen. What I would like to have happen is actually for the resolution to stick. Yeah. And for our characters to have to deal with that. And deal with that future. And even when they go in and confront Thanos, it's not something that they can ever undo. And have to deal with the fact that because they were incapable of making those, I mean, most of the people who were responsible for making the decision got dusted at the end, which was, in a lot of ways, upsetting. Like, Strange got dusted, Scarlet Witch went away, Peter Quill went away. This, like...
Gamora didn't get dusted, but she died.
Gamora was dead, so, like, all these people who were not willing to... Loki maybe is dead. Yeah. Right?
But not Cap.
But not Captain America, right? So he can learn. So I think that would be interesting. I think that would actually be a very good story. Because of contracts, among other things, and because this is not how Marvel works, and it wasn't what happened in the comic of the Infinity Crisis, or whatever they call it. I think it was called the Infinity Crisis, but I could be mistaken. Somebody please correct me, because I have no ego to wound here. I've wanted to read this particular story for a while, even though it's completely ridiculous if you read the summary of it. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing gets, reset buttoned, basically, in the original story, and the stones get redistributed. I think they're going to do something like that. What I would love to see for the execution of that is for them to get the Time Stone back. So get the Time Stone out of the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Use the Time Stone, go back, and sequentially have those people make that decision, and then so you see like the past time where this is happening, and in the future you see the gauntlet and the stones are bursting away from the gauntlet as Loki goes, nope. Yeah. Thor has to die. One of the stones goes away, and then Scarlet Witch going, okay, no, we're gonna, I have to nuke Vision's stone out of his head. Oops. And cascade that way.
Yeah, I think that would not be as satisfying to me as the way I'm envisioning it, in part because I just hate time travel stories so much, but I think the way you're painting it would be really good. The team that I'm on, because I've seen a couple of these theories floated around, is that they are going to get the Soul Stone back by making their own sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And that's how that they, that Cap realizes that they do have to trade lives. And where I think they're going, both because I think this would be an interesting story beat, and would kind of fit because let's be honest, a lot of this is about economic decisions. Mm. And Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. are both at the end of their contracts. And, someone pointed out that it felt very weird that it's all of the original Avengers are still alive. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe what's going to happen is that all of them are going to somehow wind up being sacrificed, because that then puts a fantastic... I think it puts paid to Cap being wrong, and Cap learning that, and Tony learning that, and then willing to make those sacrifices, as well as Thor and Hulk. But also it then sets up that is the end of the original Avengers story, and now we have room for T'Challa and Spider-Man and this next generation to come in.
And Adam Warlock, who definitely will be showing up before the next.
And Captain Marvel,
right? Captain Marvel for sure. That's just straight up confirmed now, because we saw the Captain Marvel symbol on Nick Fury's phone and at the stinger at the very end. That half the people in the theater when I was watching it walked out before it happened. I'm like, how can you go to a very brief rant? How can you go to a Marvel movie in a theater, not see a post credits or mid credits scene, and think that you're good, and there's nothing else to see? Yeah, I'm expecting that maybe those people had this was their second watch of the movie or something, or maybe they just didn't know any better. But yeah, so Captain Marvel is 100% confirmed. James Gunn said for sure Warlock was not in Infinity War, was not in this movie, but I'm pretty sure that they're cognizant of that character. Yeah. So originally, Warlock was the possessor of the Soul Stone. So clearly they're changing that plot line, but he probably will ultimately end up being the possessor of the Soul Stone. That's who remember the aliens from Guardians 2? Yeah. That's who they're working with.
The hierarchy, the monarch,
the aristocracy, or whatever the crap they call themselves.
The gold kids.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's going to be, and I think that would be satisfying to me. That would be a good end for Cap and for Tony. Yes. And maybe Thor and Hulk stay around, or maybe they don't. But a way to sort of make room for frankly, all these great new characters who I want to see have their own movies. I mean, I want more. Like when T'Challa died, that was the only part where I was like,
that was a punch in the gut.
That was such a punch in the gut, but it was also like, really, Marvel? You're going to kill the most successful here?
No.
And also, you finally gave us a black superhero and you immediately killed him?
Yeah.
Like,
that was the clear indicator that no, these deaths aren't sticking.
Right.
Which, in a lot of ways, cheapens the deaths.
But it also, I mean, but still Peter Parker saying it made me cry. You know, like him begging Tony, I don't want to die. Yeah. That moment has the resonance it does. On some level, you're right. I wish, but it's also just, I don't know how you tell the rest of the stories. I mean, like, I'll be honest, I am super excited for Luke Cage in a month.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what they do with Luke Cage. I think they have to set it, like, just back in time a couple of months.
Or they acknowledge that half the world's population is gone. And that's a huge thing, right?
To me, half the world population going would be such a fundamentally world-changing event. I don't see how you possibly do it and still have it be a Luke Cage story in any recognizable way.
There are ways. We'll see. We'll see what they do with it. I mean, you could for sure tell an Iron Fist story that way, but like they haven't really told us an Iron Fist.
Oh God! Please tell me it happens to the Defenders and Danny Rand got turned to ash.
That's the Iron Fist story that I'm thinking of specifically.
Yes, because then we just get the Connie Wing story.
Yep, exactly.
I'm sold.
Yep. So the second season of Iron Fist is actually just Daughters of the Dragon. Yep. I'm in.
Okay. We're in.
See, we solved it.
We figured it out.
Unfortunately, they're probably going to get Zack Snyder involved with that project. Oh. No, I'm kidding. It's not actually going to happen. It's just that we almost went an entire episode without mentioning it.
Yep, now we've checked the Zack Snyder is back.
And the Marvel Netflix, we've done it all.
Yep.
We're good. Checks are in the mail.
Alright, any last things you want to say before we do a wrap-up?
So, just because we spent a lot of time talking about it, it's something where we actually, I feel, still somewhat disagree. I just wanted to make it clear that because Gamora is... So we had two female characters who had to make these sacrifice decisions, right? And really just couldn't do it. Because the Gamora is the one who fails the most, we spent a lot of time talking about it. And I just wanted to come out and say that I do not blame Gamora for any of this. I feel like her story was incredibly tragic.
Right.
From start to finish. And similarly with Scarlet Witch, but for Gamora's sake, it's because, the price she ends up paying, so this was something that frustrates me to know it. The price Gamora ends up paying is the price that she was willing to pay, but because it's at the wrong time, it doesn't do what she wanted. Right? She wanted to die to protect the Soul Stone. Instead, she dies to give Thanos the Soul Stone. If she had just not been there, he would not have been able to acquire it. And that is incredibly frustrating to me.
Yeah. No, and there's a wonderful irony there that pays off. And I think I will say, I think you've convinced me that there's a distinction between was the person wrong and do you blame them?
Right.
And I think it is harder for me to say I don't blame Gamora than the others, except Peter Quill, and I'll get to that in a second. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. Maybe I'm going to take blame out of it almost entirely. Well, no, because I'm going to say it for Peter, but that I can understand why she can't do it, and that maybe the better way to say it is to put it in her shoes. I probably wouldn't be able to do it anyway. And it's
tragic, right?
And I think, from a writing perspective, I kind of wish it was a different character who had that happen, because I think you're right, with it being her and Scarlet Witch, and there's some gender stuff happening there that's I wish the writers hadn't done. But I will say, because here's the thing is, maybe I blame Gamora a little bit, but mostly you're right, I don't blame her. Peter Quill I blame. Him I'm able to say, even though I can relate to you, I guess I can say, I want a person to overcome their emotional love for their sister or their brother in order to save the world, half the world, but I can't expect it of them. I can expect you to get a hold of your emotions long enough, to put your own dick back in your pants and your ego back inside, to not punch that. Yes. And that's where I can say, in terms of a hierarchy, I'm mad at Gamora. I blame Peter Quill.
Right.
Maybe
And,
that's
I mean,
a better way to put it.
I am upset with Gamora to the same extent that I'm upset with Loki. Because it is literally the same decision. This is their beloved sibling.
Yeah.
Right? And Thanos is the parallel between those two situations is actually very, very strong. Except, again, although at that point, Thanos doesn't actually know where the Tesseract is, so actually the parallel is identical. He thinks it's on the ship somewhere, and he's probably not wrong. But Loki could conceivably have gotten away.
Yeah, I guess that's the exact reason why I was holding Gamora to the higher standard. As well a little bit because Gamora has been presented to us as heroic in a way Loki never has. But so it's almost a sort of like Loki gonna Loke.
I don't know. Gamora is more of a free agent in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies because
that's true.
The Guardians of the Galaxy are alright. I love these movies, so fans of these movies understand I'm saying this with all of the positive intentions I can, but they are children.
Yeah.
The most adult member of the Guardians of the Galaxy in all of the movies is Groot.
Yeah. Sometimes Rocky, sometimes Groot, but yeah.
And actually, excuse me, in movie 2, Mantis. So in Guardians 2 and in Infinity War, Mantis is incredibly adult. Yeah, there's no way these deaths are sticking. Mantis and Drax went away?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, getting back to your point, and again, here's one of those things where I think you and I may have had different readings of the facts being presented to us.
Mm-hmm.
If the fact presented to us is that that Thanos doesn't know that Loki has the Tesseract and won't be able to find it, then yes, the two characters should be judged exactly the same way.
Because Thanos is asking Loki, "Where's the Tesseract? Give it to me."
Right.
And Loki's like, "No."
Yeah.
And then he summons it up.
I guess, and from that, but that wasn't my reading of it. Because my reading of it was that still he knows that it's in that physical proximity, and so he's going to get it eventually. As separate from Gamora, where it is literally like, I don't know on what planet, where in the literal universe it is. But either way, I think to me the end point is, you're right, I don't think I can really blame them. I can be angry at them, but I can blame Peter Quill.
Oh, I can blame Peter Quill. I kind of blame Cap, too, because you know for sure that if Captain America I'm pretty confident at least that if Captain America said to Scarlet Witch, look, maybe you can do it without killing him and please try, but we have to, we don't have another choice. I think that could have convinced her.
Yeah.
Only because he wouldn't say that if he thought there was another way.
Yeah.
Because he holds that power.
And here, and then we were saying before that, like, I hope the writers know, I think the writers think that Cap is wrong when he says we don't trade lives.
Yes.
I don't know if they realize that Cap is being a hypocrite.
Right.
Because I think it sounds like the kind of heroic thing that someone like Cap would say, except that, like we said, Cap has been very willing to trade his own life multiple times. So let's wrap this up. I thought overall, I mean, this is a fantastic movie, and it raises so many great questions, and I think, I want us to sign up to go see Infinity War 2 when it comes and or whenever we see it, but to record right after it, because we're going to have so much to talk about. And it was funny, the person I saw the movie with, the first thing that they said to me was, can we put ourselves in a coma for a year? Because the idea of just waiting until the next movie comes out is just agony.
Well, we're not going to wait until exactly the next movie comes out,
Because Captain Marvel gets her own movie before the next Avengers, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. But
so
that one's set...
want to see that.
That one's going to be set in the 80s.
Yeah.
Which,
it is? Oh,
yeah.
That's exciting.
Oh, no, yeah. We get Phil Coulson.
Oh,
yeah,
so
this is going to be so good there. So, you got to hear what I think. You got to hear what Jacob think. What do you guys think? Obviously, this movie has prompted a lot of discussion. We'd love to hear your perspectives. What do you think of Gamora? What do you think of Peter Quill? Can you convince us that Peter Quill was actually right, or that any of these others are right? Do you think Strange was wrong? What do you? What's your take on it? You can email us. You can tweet us. You can find us on Facebook, all at Superhero Ethics. You can also email us at superheroethics@gmail.com. Send in your thoughts on it, or send in a question. We'd love to discuss it on the air. Also. This was our 49th episode. We've decided that for our 50th episode, we are going to do something special, where myself and Jacob and Paul, the original co-host, are all going to be on here. And we're basically going to take a tour of the Superhero Ethics Greatest Hits. We're going to look at 5 or 6 of the big questions that we've addressed in the past and kind of re-ask them, in part to give Paul and Jacob a chance to bounce their ideas off each other, but in part also to see how have our thoughts on those questions evolved. And we haven't picked those questions yet, so we want to open it to you all. What have been some of the questions that we have started to touch on, or that we went into in depth and you want us to do more on, or anything like that? What's a question you'd like us to talk about in that sort of global wrap-up episode? It'll be in a couple weeks, so again, tweet us, Facebook us, email us, however you want to find us, go for it. So that's for me, signing off. Jacob, any last words?
Please have one of those be our robots people too.
No, I'm kidding, but that is clearly a topic. It was one of the first ones that I had done. The telepaths one, obviously, very, very near and dear to my heart. But seriously, love talking about these things. I really wish we had gotten more time to talk about Thanos as a character, but we'll probably bring him up again, but like much in the same way we brought up Wilson Fisk.
I'm sure.
That's it for me. I look forward to seeing what people have to contribute to the conversation. And as long as it's something we can engage with, we're happy to do so. We do that frequently. Whenever we see comments go out, if we feel we have something to add or to reply or to go back and forth with, we'll do that.
Yeah, and I will say, I think robots are people too. We may well talk about it on the 50th episode, but either way, we're definitely going to be talking about it soon. I know we've talked about wanting to do something about Westworld and about Blade Runner, both of which really explore those questions. And I also actually posted a really interesting article on the Superhero Ethics Facebook page about that question, specifically referencing Westworld. So I really encourage folks, if you want to start discussing that, look at that article and start posting things there. And I'm sure Jacob would love to find some time to get to you, as would I. So on behalf of Jacob and myself, on behalf of Paul, coming soon, thank you all so much for being part of this. Have a good day.